So in yesterday's video, I talked about where I was personally at this time in my life around 2010 and my ambivalence about platforming. And this one, I want to talk about the context, so because this at this point, church church growth as a movement was kind of dying as well. And I think a lot of people were beginning to realize that it just simply wasn't working anymore. Maybe you've seen the stats; they're all over the place. You know, Pew Research, Barna, Gallup. They all show that our efforts to create the kingdom of God, to advance the kingdom of God, have been failing miserably over the last two generations. What is it, like a quarter of the country now claims to be none, N-O-N-E, not religiously affiliated at all, which presumably means agnostic or atheist. And when I was growing up, that was much, much smaller number. Now, whether or not people truly have faith or not, it's not the point. People aren't even pretending anymore. They're not even trying. There's just the idea of what's called nominal Christianity is just declining rapidly. Um, COVID, in fact, can be seen when it comes to ministry life not as a black swan event or something out of the blue, but really an acceleration of what was already a downward trend. We have spent decades on church growth, and all we've gotten for it is a generation of people that are disinclined, disengaged, increasingly disaffiliated, and even disinterested in Jesus. Church growth has not worked. We have learned that we cannot engineer the kingdom ourselves. Uh, I think a lot of what our current problem is in our denomination of United Methodism is that it's not so much a liberal versus conservative issue as it is an issue of works righteousness. I think there's an arrogance that's deeply embedded in our own work, a lack of humility, and a belief that is, I think, comes from the social gospel, which basically says that we are going to engineer the kingdom ourselves, and it's our job, in fact, to create the kingdom. I came to see platforming, even sincere people in platforming that were getting it confused with a kind of works righteousness, a kind of an idea that it's up to us in order to be able to do this well. Now, what's crazy is that when I was at Abingdon, I was asked to help relaunch this line of leadership, which had been primarily driven for the previous 10 to 15 years by two authors, Adam Hamilton and my first boss, Michael Slaughter. And they told me, literally, I went in and they said, we need the next generation of Adams and Mikes. And so find those. And so I began to research churches that were growing in our tribe and to see what was happening in ministry and maybe to begin to publish those people. And after a while of collecting data, I began to realize that I got this really interesting data about interesting congregations around the country that are doing good things. And so maybe people could benefit from this. So I actually went out and posted it online. I created this top 25 list of fastest growing large United Methodist churches. And it went viral and it was crazy. And so there was this kind of irony that my platform, in one way, didn't die, but maybe even kind of grew with my publication of this list. But the list itself is about church growth. And I'm not even sure I believed in church growth. Um, I'm writing a book right now with Lynn Sweet, and we're exploring an idea that the kingdom is actually telos. There's a Greek word that is used frequently when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God. And telos can be properly understood as the end or the purpose. It's the end of history. It's the purpose of life is telos. Telos being God's presence. That we've been thinking about the kingdom wrong, that everything begins and ends with the presence of God. Even the best employee for Jesus is missing this point entirely. We cannot create it, nor are we called to create it. This was a fundamental shift for me, and it informed what happened next. So, in tomorrow's video, I'm going to talk about as I began to understand this shift from works righteousness to God's presence given to us by grace, that how that began to shape what came next for me and what I hope to do different with publishing. Till tomorrow, friends.